Questwise here for Ages and Empires, and today we're going to talk about Alexander the Great. Thought it would be interesting to do a comparison between the Great Battles of Alexander by GMT Games and the Avalon Hill Alexander the Great board game. But before we kind of jump into the compare and contrast comparisons of the two games, I thought I would tell you a little bit about my attachment to Alexander the Great. And let's jump over to the side table here real quick, and I will show you my introduction, where I learned about Alexander the Great and how I became to be somewhat obsessed with this individual. So here we are at the side table, and my first introduction to Alexander the Great came when I was introduced to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. I spent my hard-earned lawn mowing money to purchase this book. This is the original book. You can see it's got some tape along the edge here. The spine has seen better days. Back in probably late 80s, early 90s, I purchased this book from my local Walden Books in our the closest mall, which was about an hour away from where I lived. I took that money and had learned about Dungeons and Dragons from an uncle of mine, and purchased this book. And in this book, under descriptions of fighters and such, it talks about different heroes that you might investigate in order to learn more about what a fighter is. And as you can see right in the center there, Alexander the Great. And I'm not sure why that one stuck out to me as opposed to like Richard the Lionheart or Spartacus or Hannibal. Possibly just because of the title, because of the name. But I was super enthralled by who this Alexander the Great was, and began to do a lot of research. A year or so later, I had a friend, a fellow kid who rode the bus with me in high school, who was a big heavy metal fan, introduced me to Iron Maiden and the song Alexander the Great. The first album I ever bought from Iron Maiden was the Somewhere in Time album, which featured the Alexander the Great song. Now, the more I studied Alexander the Great, I realized that Bruce Dickinson, when writing the song, had some some details wrong. But over and all, it really increased my desire to learn even more about Alexander. And I remember one day going to my world history teacher in high school and asking him everything he knew about Alexander the Great, which wasn't a lot. Basically, everything that I had known and I had learned. But there was an elderly widow lady who lived around the corner of the lake from where I grew up. And let me take you to that thing that she introduced me to that further increased my obsession with Alexander the Great. So once my fervor of of fanaticism for Alexander the Great reached its peak, a friend of our family, a friend of my grandparents, gifted me this book. In fact, she gifted me the entire set of these historical sort of encyclopedias by Will Durant. This one particularly, The Life of Greece, which encompasses basically the entirety of the history of Greece. But there's an amazing section in here on Alexander the Great, and trying to find that really quick here. There we go. So as you can see here, chapter 22 is Alexander the Great, Soul of a Conqueror. And this is where I really learned the sort of like quirkiness or the intricacies of Alexander and his father, the King Philip, and the Macedonians. You can see here that I've underlined some stuff that really appealed to me. I learned about the horse Bucephalus and Alexander's taming of said horse, and it goes all the way through basically his entire life, and his conquering and his death at the age of 32, 33, roughly. But this book really, again, sort of launched my fervor, fanaticism, if you will, for Alexander the Great. And then when I went off to college, I studied ancient and medieval history and languages, at which time I wrote several papers and several theses on Alexander, as well as many other historical figures, including Vlad Dracula and a number of different King Arthur, of different historical figures. But Alexander has always been just so fascinating to me. And I know he's a huge figure to study via history, but and many others have done a lot more, probably more in-depth studies than I ever have. But just one of my favorites. So it's my goal, my passion to collect different games and different books based around Alexander and his life and his conquests. So here we are at my main game table inside my studio, my house in the basement, and I have set up, I don't know if I can get it all on camera, but I have finally set up the Battle of Gaugamela between Alexander and his forces of Macedonians. Versus Darius III, also known as Darius the Great, oddly enough, and his massive amounts of Persian armies. One of the things I'd like to do in a further video is kind of go into more detail about some of the, because Persia was a conglomerate of a lot of different nations and peoples and cultures. And that is greatly exemplified by the great battles of history and what Mark Herman and Richard Berg have put together for this game. But I want to go into further detail about some of these cultures and these different peoples that made up the Persian Empire. Now, the Greek Empire, the Macedonian Empire, I should say, was a confederation of different nations and stuff as well. But the Persians just had a huge amount of different cultures involved in their empire through conquering, and over decades and centuries of conquering different nations, most notably under Xerxes and, of course, Darius himself. But one of my favorites that I really want to focus on is this yellow chits here, the Scythian nomads. I've always been kind of enthralled by their culture, being a very nomadic type of horse-driven culture. But here's the table set up for the Battle of Gaugamela, or the Battle of Arbela, depending on what you're reading. It's been called both. But let's switch over to the other table and I'll show you the Avalon Hill version. So over here on the side table we have Alexander the Great. This is the Avalon Hill version. I actually picked this up. This was the very first game that I picked up from Noble Knight Games when I decided to get back into the Hex Encounter war game hobby just less than a year ago. And the reason I picked this up is because of my love of Dungeons and Dragons and my history with Dungeons and Dragons. This was actually designed by Gary Gygax himself. And they pull back a little bit here, and I'll show you the board and the encompassing of, you have the Macedonians on this side of Alexander, and you have the Persians on this far side. This board is often described as being a crazy 70 acid trip. It does have some very strange colors involved in it. But instantly when I got this and set this up, I realized there were some massive inconsistencies in what we know, what little historical information we have of the Battle of Gaugamela, the Battle of Arbela, between Alexander and his Macedonian Confederacy and the Persian Empire under Darius III. So this is more of a sort of board game version of the battle. It's very simplified, I guess, in a sense, in that a lot of there are a lot of chits and cultures depicted in this game that are not in the Great Battles of History version, and vice versa. There are some more cultures and more peoples designated in the Great Battles of History that are not represented here in the Avalon Hill version. But this was very much more of a board game version, where the Avalon Hill, or excuse me, the Great Battles of Alexander by GMT Games, much more of a simulationist version, although, I mean, we really don't know a ton about that battle, and so it's hard to, I mean, we know enough, but it is not, there are definitely some inconsistencies in the stories and the things written, the histories written down about it that make it okay, I guess, in a sense, for the different publishers and different aspects of a game on a tabletop to represent exactly how the battle was arrayed. So as you can see here, Alexander's forces are sort of broken up into this sort of scattered line. And what Avalon Hill did was that they used these large square counters to represent the phalanxes. Again, one of the inconsistencies is here that Alexander is actually with one of the phalanx at the beginning of the battle. There are written down histories saying that he was actually mounted with his companion cavalry, which is what is represented in the Great Battles of Alexander via GMT Games and Berg and Herman. They I think more accurately represent the fact that Alexander would be mounted alongside his companion cavalry. But for whatever reason, Gary Gygax decided with Avalon Hill's game that he would be with the phalanx to begin the game. Which, I mean, either way, he's still at the forefront. It was very well known. Alexander was always at the front of the battle with his men in the front lines. And then, as you can see, we go back here to the Persians. A wide array of stuff. Now, a couple of the things that there are similarities between the two games is that there's a lot of cavalry on the flanks. I think this is just a very well-known historical aspect, right? That the cavalry or the infantry made up sort of the back line and the center of the mass of the army, and then you had lots of cavalry and archers out towards the outer edges on the flanks or the wings of the armies themselves. And both the Macedonians and the Persians have that same sort of aspect. And I think that's just a general hypothesis, a general rule when it came to ancient warfare of that era. But let's switch back over to the main table, and I'll show you how this sort of compares the board game version to the actual sort of simulation version. So back over here at the main table, you can see we have lots of cavalry out here on the edges, as well as some skirmishers up in front. Alexander here is depicted as being with the companion cavalry, which I think is a lot more of a historically correct version of where he might be. The historical records that we have of the battles that he was with the cavalry when he attacked Darius and was able to punch a hole in one of the lines and actually drive through and attack Darius. But as you can see back here on the Macedonian line, we have cavalry on the outer edges. We move into the Hypapsis, who were the sort of like men-at-arms, heavy infantry aspect of the sort of royal guard, followed closely by the actual phalanx themselves right in the middle. And then again on this flank over here, we have more cavalry, and then the back lines we have some more skirmishers, some more phalanx, and of course that infamous baggage train or baggage cart that was noted as being as part of this battle. Over on the Persian side of things, again, you can see the same kind of thing. The infantry make up most of the back row of the army, and then you have much faster moving forces like skirmishers and cavalry making up the main bulk of the army itself, as well as it was predicted that, if I can find them here real quickly, yeah, here they are, that there were approximately 12 to 15 elephants at this battle too, and this is one of the first recorded historical accounts of having actual elephants on a battlefield, as well as a line of chariots as well too. Darius and the Persian Empire was very famous for their fast-moving chariots. And again, the Scythian nomads, some of my favorites. Sorry these are upside down. I actually have the game set up to play solo, and so they are facing correctly towards each other on the battlefield here. But yeah, so it's just a quick look at the great battles of Alexander, a comparison between this and the Avalon Hill version of Alexander the Great. Hope you've enjoyed this video. It's just a quick look. I'm going to, over the next probably several days, possibly couple of weeks, play out this massive battle of Gaugamela, and I might do a video at the end of this, or end of my playthrough, to update you on the outcome of said battle. And I might play out through the Avalon Hill version again as well. I haven't played it in several months, but play through that and give you my comparison in a video between the two and sort of the outcome of both of those. So until next time, I'm Questwise, my friends. Stay out there, be safe, and as always, game on.